Welcome to Training Unleashed, the show that will help you design and deliver training that's off the chain and will make a difference. Now, here's your host, Evan Hackel.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to an exciting edition of Training Unleashed. We have a very interesting guest today for a lot of reasons. One, this guy really knows training and the impact of training can have on a business, but he's also works for NASCAR racetracks. And he has promised me at the end of the show, we're going to talk about things people should watch for when they watch a NASCAR race that maybe you are not watching for. So I've actually had a little taste of what he's about to share. It's really kind of interesting. So that should be kind of fun. His name is Jay Nadeau, and he is director, and I'm going to let him give you the full title because I'm very dyslexic and I'm below it. So Jay, what is your title?
I'm the Director of Risk Management and Loss Control for NASCAR.
Excellent. And NASCAR, I'm sure you can all imagine, has a lot of risk management and things to concern with, and the safety of the people, the safety of the fans, and obviously not just human safety, but economic safety too. So I'm just going to ask you a straightforward question, which is, why is it so important? And I think we all know that it's important, but how does NASCAR look at safety?
I think, whether it's the on-track competition, what everybody sees in front of the camera, it's huge. I mean, the technology that goes into the race cars and stuff like that, that's, I think, what everybody thinks about. But behind the scenes, if anybody's ever gone by a racetrack, it's an empty facility for a good part of the year. And then all of a sudden it pops up the population of a small town. And to run that, there are hundreds, in some cases, thousands of people supporting that event. And every moving part you have, there's a potential for injury or accident, and that equates to a loss. Whether it could be personal loss or financial loss. And so safety for any business is always going to be one of the priorities they have.
And can you kind of just give us maybe a little feeling for the kinds of accomplishments that you have doing what you're doing? You guys track any statistics, anything of that nature?
I think the end result, at the end of the year, obviously we can look at, how many year over year, how many incidents we have. This last year with COVID has been kind of hard to put our finger on that number because of reduced events and people traveling and stuff. But year over year, we look at, we have, to me, if you had two buckets, we have what happens to our employees, and then if we have stuff that happens at our facilities with our guests. And, obviously we want every year we want those numbers to be less and less. And the team, I'm just one person, and every facility that we have has somebody kind of that does a safety role. And each of those take an integral part in our plan to reduce those things through training and education and putting the right people in the right positions. So I think year over year, we've seen a reduction in most of those, but then you have those rare occasions where you may see auto accidents spike because people are traveling more, or you had to hire some new people that maybe didn't know what they were doing, or got into a situation where they, got hurt.
Let me ask the question a little differently. What would it be like if you didn't do any safety training? With all the volunteers you have, first time, turnover in staff is pretty high because you have a lot of non-full-time people. What would it be like?
Probably chaos would be the word I would use. Everybody thinks, I think anybody that's listening or watching this can relate to it, that everybody thinks they know what it takes to do somebody's job. But when you bring in a volunteer group or somebody that maybe Monday through Friday, they sell auto parts, and then you bring them in on a volunteer basis, and they're going to run a concession stand, running grills and stuff like that. Well, that person has to be trained, because if you don't train them, their auto parts sales knowledge does not apply to making hamburgers. That's as simple as I can make it. So I think chaos would be the word I would use.
Okay, I totally get it. So let's just take a few moments and talk about the process. I'm a volunteer, and what would I expect? How would the training process work for me, being a volunteer?
So the way we structure, so usually our volunteers will come in, and it varies from facility to facility. Volunteers will come in usually with an organized group. So say your son or daughter were in a club, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, whatever, and they wanted to raise money. So that group would come in, and we would normally work through that volunteer group, depending on what their assignment is, whether they're, if they were parking cars or handing out, gifts at the gate or something like that. So the training would be figured out what you're going to do, and then it would be detailed to that. It may be training that the facility itself provides, or it may be training that the group you're part of provides.
So would you do it normally like a group leader-led training? Do you do e-learning, virtual? How are you going about it?
Yes. So so it varies. So yeah, usually if it's that volunteer group comes in, it would be a case of whoever the lead person is, we would make sure they have the proper training, or that they have the proper credentialing, and we would expect them to pass that on to their volunteers, because their volunteer may not be available regular work hours for what Jay does. So they would start off with that. Some of it would be in person when it comes to concessions and stuff like that, depending upon where you're at in the country or in the world. There's different food handling requirements. So some of that, they may have to take an online training course or something to certify that they know the pros and cons of handling poultry and, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's ever just one method of training. It's always going to be multiple.
No, I'm definitely a big believer in blended learning, because different people learn different ways, for sure. So what are, for you, from your perspective, your biggest learning challenges?
I think it's the seasonal nature of our workforce, because again, some tracks have their major event, and that may be the biggest thing that track has. So you have seasonal employees coming in that may work 3 days out of the year for you.
Wow.
And you're training them, to do that job, maybe a week or 2 weeks out. It varies from facility to facility, but that person's coming in and just working a couple of days, and then you won't see them until next year. And from the time that event finishes until the next time you see that employee, you've got to make sure that you keep track of everything. You got to retrain them, and then anything that they weren't previously trained on when they come in next time. So it's a pretty heavy lift because of that. And it would probably be a little bit easier if we were a Monday through Friday profession where we ran races 5 days a week instead of doing it 3 times a year at one facility out west.
Yeah. Well, I do think you have incredibly unique training issues because of that. There's no doubt about it. However, I think there's a lot that you do that applies to everybody in training. And let's just take a second and talk about the financial impact that safety training has on the company. And let's maybe first talk about things like workman's comp insurance.
Okay. Yeah. So, so providing the training, why do we provide training? Because we want to make sure that the person going out there obviously knows what they're doing, because they're there to provide a service. But on the behind the scenes or behind the curtain aspect is, if we don't properly train that employee and they become injured, some companies self-insure for their work comp, some companies run that program through somebody else. And that's one of the first things that they're going to find out, or they're going to ask, was the employee trained to do this job? And I'm not saying somebody putting the bun on upside down. I'm talking about, was this employee hurt their back lifting a box? Was that in their job description? And were they trained on how to avoid that injury or that incident from occurring? So it definitely, training you can almost, I think, correlate training to any part of your business where it touches. Even an administrative person working in an office, there's a certain amount of training or education that goes with that. Just as it relates to ergonomics, somebody sitting at a desk all day, they may not have the potential to fall off a ladder, but repetitive injury is something that can occur. And that's where I think the challenge is sometimes people that don't think they're at risk, you have to really point out to them that you have some training needs that are required.
So, and one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation with you is the people listening here are primarily in training. And, the big question always asked in training is, what's your ROI? How do we know we're successful? So some people jump to things like net promoter score. Did we move or customer satisfaction score? Did we move that needle? Some will look at closing rates depending on the kind of business they're in, or average ticket if it's a restaurant. They'll jump to those type of things. But there actually is another economic return, which is the cost and reduction of workman's comp and liability insurance. And a lot of times those savings can pay for the entire training department. But people don't spend the time thinking about that. And then here's the part that's even worse, Jay, because I talk to people about this all the time. People don't talk to their insurance company, even if they're doing the training, to take advantage of some of the discounts and benefits that they can get by demonstrating that they're doing some of the things necessary to reduce rates.
Absolutely. And it really is the same way in my personal life. If I change the auto insurers, I'm going to find out whether I can get a reduction for my age or my good driving, or that I went to a class 15 years ago. And that's the same thing in a business. You want to take advantage of everything you can, but you have to be actively engaged with your insurance company. And if that's not your department at your company, find out who it is and talk to them and find out, hey, look, we're doing this. This is what I think we need to be doing, but is there something else we should be doing that would help them feel more comfortable with the product, the employee that we're putting out there to do these jobs?
Yeah, interesting. So tell me about how you staff your training department, given the seasonal nature of the business.
So as I stated earlier, most of all of our facilities, there's somebody that kind of wears, that hat of training, and it's usually they have counterparts in each department. So if you think about what we're doing on a race day, we're doing everything from assisting fans in locating their seats to having medical trained personnel that are on the racing surface responding to those big crashes that everybody sees. So one person being a subject matter expert in all those areas isn't really realistic for what we do. So we kind of at each site have a coordinator for that. And then they work independently with their department heads to find out, okay, this is what's going to work best in this department. And they kind of support them in what their needs are. If they need something created or developed, whether it's a document or some kind of a program or something, they'll work internally to make sure that they're meeting the needs.
Interesting. And, I think the thing that probably most people don't realize is how many actual businesses you're in, right? Because you're not just running a racetrack. You've got, food and beverage, you've got concession stands, you've got all kinds of other entertainment going on. You've got multiple venues where people can go. It's got to be a tremendous amount of work for people to actually, feel or understand what's going on. How do you orientate people? Like, okay, it's race day. I'm coming in. I'm sure every year it's not the same, right? Maybe sometimes it's the same, but I'm sure that there are new sponsorships, there's new things going on, there are new setups. When I've gone to NASCAR racetracks, it kind of reminds me of the Shakespearean plays. I don't know if you know this or not, but when Shakespeare did plays, they would actually have a bear tied to a pole, and people would be taunting the bear during the play as a form of entertainment, because it was just how things were done. And when you go to a NASCAR race, from my experience, you got a lot going on there. That you've got things outside the event, you got pavilions, you got all these things going on. How do you orientate people so they know all the things that are going on?
I think it's one thing that we have found helpful is we do it because the distance. So we have NASCAR owns 15 different racetracks that actually NASCAR owns, and they're all over the country. So, and we have people that travel from track to track. So now you've got a different facility. But what we've learned is prior to those events, we will do now in the COVID world, everything is Zoom or video calls. Even prior to that, we just get everybody on a phone call and kind of walk through the whole event. Again, it's the department heads. You can't have 1,000 employees on one phone call, but empowering those department heads to teach their employees and come up with what they believe is going to be the most effective it's a huge juggling act, the events that we put on, and everything goes good. But what I try to, remind folks is that juggler's doing a great job and he's got 5 or 6 balls up in the air. But if you take one of those out when he's not expecting it, it's not going to go so good. And that those, it's a team effort. And when the employees come in, I think the most important thing for us as an entertainment business is to implore upon them to understand that the fans are the reason we're there. The fans should come first. And anything we can do to make their experience better in a safe way. That I think that's the most important thing, and really pushing the teamwork element. And our business is no different than any other business. Sometimes people get in their silos and the one department doesn't talk to the other, but we really push that every department has to be integrated to make that fan experience and make the event go off as it should.
I loved it when you said we're in the entertainment business, because that's really what you're in, right? You're not in the racing business. You do racing.
And that's what it absolutely. A few years ago, if you asked anybody, NASCAR would be synonymous with racing events. But now we've done concerts. Daytona International Speedway is getting ready to do a soccer event at a race facility. As the world has kind of evolved and the different types of entertainment venues and stuff, the industry, the company has changed with that as well. And so with those,
I did a huge corporate event. I had like 500 people come down. And I can't remember how many mock races, but they all got to ride with a rider in the car and simulate a race. And there were all kinds of things for people to do. And there was a dinner. And I mean, it was an amazing event.
Yeah, and that's really where it's going, is because you have these huge facilities, and there are some that are only have major events 2 or 3 days a year, but that facility has to be maintained the whole year. And so finding those other ways to bring people in and expose them to it. When I retired from the fire department, some of my coworkers were like, "What are you going to do? They only have 2 or 3 races a year there." They didn't know that there were about 275, 280 days of track activity between, the stuff you see on TV is the big stuff, but there's all these other small things like you're talking about that you bring a corporation in and show them what the facility is, and they get that experience. They go home and talk about that.
Oh yeah.
It's really it drives people to any exposure at a facility will drive people to, kind of pique their interest on what is NASCAR, what are they doing? Why were they there for a corporate thing that, sells widgets, but it's.
Well, I can tell you, here's my plug for those corporate events, is it brings more people to the event you're holding, right? We were holding a national convention. This was sort of our culmination party at the end. And, do you think that people want to race around a NASCAR racetrack? Absolutely. But at the same token, most schools, not everybody wants to run around a NASCAR racetrack. So you got to have all kinds of other things for people to do. And it was really a great event. So how do you guys measure success?
As it relates to training, I think in a perfect world, some people would say, well, if nobody gets hurt, nobody complains about the service they got, it's a success. I don't know that's 100%. That is a good way to measure it, but I don't know that maybe we just had good luck, So really, I think we have to see some consistency, some time and time again. If you have the same 10 people do the same task 10 times and nothing happens, okay, they were probably properly, trained to do that task. If they do it 10 times and 3 or 4 of them, mess up on multiple occasions, okay, we have to reassess. And I think that when I look at training and stuff that's going on, regardless of how it's being applied, once you train somebody, then, okay, we've trained them. Then you have to figure, okay, when's the remedial training, or when do we bring that back up? And, I don't believe in just doing it after something happens. Every now and then, let's, pull out the curriculum, look at it and say, okay, yeah, we need to adjust this. We need to update it. But not waiting until something happens, I think, helps us prepare and make sure that we are providing, I'll say, cutting edge training to our staff. And again, I think it takes, a couple years or a couple events to look back and say, okay, we're not seeing, we used to have this happening. We've trained, we're not seeing that. But it's kind of like the ball always moves to somewhere else. It's okay, so we fixed this, and now we've got to focus over here because the technology's changed, and we're not pulling tickets apart, so nobody's getting paper cuts. Now we're using scanners. So now we got to make sure that the employees are trained on how to use these new scanners. And that really, technology touches everything, and that's the thing we have to factor in. At the day of the Daytona 500, if they tell us, hey, by the way, we're not using paper tickets anymore, we're going to use these scanners, and now we've got 200 employees that have never seen this scanner, that's probably not going to go over real well. It's a great opportunity for teaching, but it's not at the opportune time.
Well, I love what you're saying, because you're really talking about observational observance. You're looking to see, does someone actually know? And not a lot of companies do that. A lot of companies will look at metrics and statistics and things like that, as opposed to observational observance of the actual knowledge of the training, which I think is great. I want to shift into how you train. And I know you're loss management, and this may not be fully in your area, how you train mid-management or higher management leadership. But before you do, as I told you in the pre-thing, we're going to do just a little plug. Training Unleashed has quite a following. We're very proud of how many people listen to these shows or watch it on C-Suite TV, which I'm very happy to be a member of C-Suite TV and C-Suite Radio. We're coming out with a book club. And the book club is going to be designed for people that want to learn about leadership, management, training. The theme is really training, but leadership and management all go together pretty well. And the way the book club is going to work is that the members of the book club are going to pick the book every. We're not going to do a book a month. We're going to do a book I want to say every 10 weeks. But there'll be stopping points. It's going to be professionally managed. It's going to be really cool. So my plug is to go to trainingunleashed.com and sign up for the book club. But the reason I'm using this as a switch into talking about mid-level management training and senior management training is one of the most effective tools I have seen is that people read common books together and have conversations about them, because that it is a form of training that's fun and simple. But enough for my plug on the book club. But how do you go about mid-level training and senior management training at NASCAR?
Great question. So, prior to COVID, the opportunity was to get our management together and share best practices. We had at least an annual event where we would do that on a very large scale. But now it's really, there's distance-based stuff that we're having to do. Obviously, I'm one, I get stuff all the time, and webinars that'll pop up and go, that's going to be interesting. I think the focus in my career, my experience with the company is really there's a push that, hiring the right people. NASCAR is a big company, and a lot of people would just like to put that on their resume. They work for NASCAR. So you may put out for a position and get 150 applicants or something, and you're only looking for one. So you hire in the best applicant, but if that person didn't come from another racetrack, how do you get them that education? And that's at any level, but it's definitely at the mid-management level. And there are a lot of similarities, in that level, dealing with accounting, dealing with, the finance people and stuff. But I think what we have found, or what I would say I've seen is be most beneficial, is that peer-to-peer and people actually training up I don't say train up their replacement, but train up the people that they work with. And I think
mentoring, I think is the term.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mentor. And, in some industries and sometimes people are afraid to do that because, wait a minute, if he knows how to do my job, they won't need me, and I think I look at it from like a military perspective. Some of my, buddies that have been in there have told me, you always want the guy next to you, the guy behind you to know your job in case you can't do it, and I think that's what we kind of lean on, is making sure that everybody, and mentoring was the word I wasn't coming up with, but that is definitely what is beneficial in this industry that's so diverse, because you can be in racing for 30, as long as they've been doing it. But now, by the way, hey, we're going to start putting on concerts. You don't know anything about doing a concert. So how do you do that? How do you do that correctly? You find a
Yeah.
subject matter expert and you lean on them and you bring them in, and now you've got that knowledge. So the next guy that comes in behind you, now you can tell them what you've learned because you've actually done it. And, book work and doing stuff like that is beneficial, but until you actually have the ability to apply it, it's just kind of sitting in the gray area there until you actually apply it.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's interesting. A couple of years ago, I had a guy's Navy SEAL, and he says when you go as a Navy SEAL, you might estimate 50% of the SEALs are going to lose their life in the mission. You don't wish it, but you prepare for it. So every Navy SEAL has to have the ability to actually lead the mission. Every one of them. So that you can't just go in and assume, well, there's the one leader, because that leader could die. So you don't know who's going to be the next leader. I really love the idea of mentoring. It's and having people ready absolutely is a terrific way to go. I'm just to share with you that a long time ago, I was in the floor covering business, and one of the biggest things that would happen in floor covering is you would always hire people in the floor covering business because no one ever had time to train, right? So all the product training, all that stuff took forever. So you would hire people, and then at a certain point realize that, maybe you needed fresh people with fresh mindset that could be trained on newer ideas and innovation. And then when it's harder to unlearn than it is to learn. So when you have training and mentoring programs, you can actually bring in the best people and not just bring people that have pre-existing knowledge, which it sounds like that's the way you're thinking, and which I think is great.
Yeah, I think there's a balance that has to be struck between finding somebody with a developed resume, but then are they willing to, or are you able to train them on what they don't know, and do they know what they don't know? I've often taken positions where the hardest thing at first is knowing what you don't know, and the minute you realize it, you're much better off. And I think that sometimes people look at resumes and they'll bring somebody in and maybe pass somebody else over. But as you stated, sometimes it's much easier to train somebody to do it the right way than to untrain them from doing it the way they've always done it.
Well, I think that I'm pro training, right? This is a show that's pro training.
Absolutely.
And having competent training enables companies to have the freedom to choose, right? You might bring in someone who's seasoned because you think they're the right person, or you might not bring in someone seasoned. And training is the freedom to make that choice. I'm unabashedly pro training here. So live it, breathe it. So we're getting to the end, and we promised everyone at the beginning that you were going to share some tips. If you went to a NASCAR racetrack, what you should look for that maybe you're not looking at. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. So, in NASCAR, the different types of racing isn't for everybody. And I'll have people talk to me. It's like, oh, sometimes it gets so boring. And I'll ask them, I'm like, well, what do you watch the race for? And like, well, the car's going around the track, and, everybody's got their favorite driver. And what I try to get people to do is there's so much other stuff going on. And the number one thing I think that people overlook is what goes on pit road. And there's some people that will come to our events. They'll never leave their camper. They'll watch it on their TV. They just want that experience. Other people will go sit up in the grandstands and they'll watch the race. There's other people that want to be on pit road. And I think if you watch the races with any consistency, you're going to see that some of these races are decided by hundreds, 1,000ths of a second or whatever. And that time, can be made up on the track, but watch pit road. Look at what these teams do. And I say team, there's always a big discussion out there whether these drivers are athletes and if they're driving around in a circle or whatever. Even if you take the drivers out of it, look at what these crews do on pit road. Full tire change, fuel in the car and stuff, and they're done in like 8 seconds. I'm mad if Jiffy Lube takes 10 minutes for my vehicle. I mean, it's just amazing. And some of those guys that are on those pit crews, that's not their full-time job. They're the Monday through Friday doing something else. and then they fly into the racetrack or drive in dependent upon their team's budget. But they train for that. And it's just amazing. And I've actually had a few people that I've told that to, like, I've never thought about it that way. And you get down there, you whatever the ticket cost is to get on pit road, and you see what those guys are doing. And I think it gets you another aspect. And then when you look at, okay, those are the guys that make that car go, and then they get the car back out on track, and you realize the drivers are the ones that are in front of the camera, and they're the ones that people want autographs and stuff. But I have seen little kids ask some of the pit guys for their autographs and stuff, and it's completely different. But so I think that's a missed element that some people, as they get into the sport, or maybe they really can't dive into it, I think that's something that would give them another perspective on just what it takes for those cars to go out there and do what they do.
Well, I've had the privilege of watching a NASCAR racetrack and being able to observe pit row in the pit area, and it is incredibly impressive. It's a great example of not just teamwork, but training. It's actually athletic, the speed in which they move. And then the ability to observe and make changes at the last second, depending on, what's happening with the car and the tires, and, something happen to a tire, they got to replace the tire. I mean, all these last minute decisions, and working together as a team it's really, I think, very impressive, from not just because you should observe it as a fan, but just to appreciate it as somebody that loves training.
Yeah.
So we're down to the last question, Jay. Every guest knows what this question is. If you had one tip to share with the audience, what would that tip be?
My tip for the audience is, when, through this, we've talked about how vital training is. And I think the best resource that we have are the people that are doing the job for us. And I think so often, and whether it's upper management, mid management, or whatever, they forget to take into the account the people that are out there actually doing the work and getting their input. And I'm not saying that you always have to take it and run with it, but sometimes you have that little nugget that you'll get from an employee. And what I like to say is, I'll hear people say, well, why do we do that? And somebody will say, well, that's the way we've always done it. And I love to counter them with saying, the way we've always done it isn't the way we always have to do it. Don't change just to change, but getting down to those people that are out there doing the job, doing those tasks that we're telling them how to do, they're doing it and they know how to do it. So I think that's my tip, is everybody has something to offer. It doesn't matter what their pay scale is or what their title is. Everybody has something to offer. And if we take that advice and work it into what we're doing, I think we're better off as trainers and overall as a company, and for me, a sport, an entertainment venue.
Well, I think that's a tip everyone can use. I really do. And it's, it's interesting. We do a lot of consulting work with clients and things like that. And we always insist that we include the actual people doing the actual work, because believe it or not, they know something. And a lot of times management, now I'm not talking about NASCAR, but I'm just talking about in general, makes decisions without bringing in the people that are actually in the field doing the actual work. So I love your tip. It's a great tip. I want to thank you, Jay, for being a great guest. I want to thank all of our listeners. I want to thank the C-Suite TV, C-Suite Radio for being great partners. Listeners especially, thank you. And please go to trainingunleashed.net. Join our book club. It's going to be amazing. Everyone have a great day.
Training Unleashed is brought to you by Tortal Training, specializing in e-learning and interactive online training solutions for corporate, government, nonprofit, and franchise organizations. Tortal makes effective training easier. Just go to tortal.net to gain access to real-world tools that can make a difference. That's tortal.net, Tortal, tortal.net.